NFL back in action Thursday night. You hear all the action right here on 97.3 ESPN. Chiefs versus Texans. Of course, the Eagles are back in action this Sunday versus the Washington football team. Again, the NFL and more right now. Joining me on the Boardwalk kind of hotline, Emory Hunt, NFL Insider. Check him out at FBall Game Plan on Twitter. You never want to miss out on his analysis of the NFL. Also covers the college football game as well year long. Emory, my friend, football is finally back. How you doing?
I'm doing fine, man. I appreciate you having me on. Glad for it to be back.
I'm glad you're jumping on because, the football season is right around the corner. And I think one of the things that's very interesting before we get to any of the specifics is, how do you feel about this whole dynamic with some stadiums are going to have fans, some stadiums are not? We know that Kansas City is going to have some fans. The Eagles, not going to have fans. So what is your perspective on how that's going to affect these NFL players based off of anything you've already seen from maybe the other sports?
This is my case study for why I believe crowd noise doesn't make a difference, or playing at home or away doesn't matter. And this is the perfect experiment to prove that, because I believe once you're out there on the field, you're so focused in on your assignment, trying to remember the snap count, the audibles, that you're not even listening to the crowd noise. It's only until the play is over with, that's when you start to hear the noise. So I think we're probably going to see a lot more efficient play because guys can just really focus in. I know that's sort of saying that the crowd noise can make a difference, but I really don't believe it'll have that big of an impact. It'll make the TV crowd, feel like they're watching a regular game, as you have fans there and not pump crowd noise in. But as we've seen with the NBA bubble, you don't know that they're playing in a bubble. It really sounds like, there's fans there in the stands, and you really it becomes white noise, and you're just actually watching the action out there on the field.
The other thing that's interesting is, and you cover the college football game at all levels. Some of these guys who come into the NFL, they don't come from backgrounds of playing in front of big crowds. College football is much more than the Swamp and Death Valley. It's, it's a school like Southern Miss, for example. It's smaller schools that maybe don't have the biggest crowd. So could maybe some of the guys who have experience with less people or less of a crowd, maybe they could excel as well at the big league level?
I think what really what really will happen, and what it will all boil down to, is no different than practice, which is essentially what is going to feel like out there in a game. You really just want to beat the guy in front of you. You really want to put on a show for whoever is watching. Yeah, it may not be people in the stands, but a hell of a lot of people are watching on TV. And so I think guys just want to go in and prove that they can play. And, it doesn't matter if one person is watching or 100 people are watching. So I think it'll be just like practice. Guys go hard at practice. Guys try to show up and show out at practice. And this will be just the same thing.
Emory Hunt joining us here on the Boardwalk on the hotline on 97.3 ESPN. Make sure you follow him on Twitter at FBall Game Plan. Let's get into the NFC East. Of course, here we got the Eagles versus the Washington football team this Sunday. And one of the interesting questions is now Doug Peterson says Jason Peters came to him and says, put me a left tackle, coach. So the guy who was coming in to replace Brandon Brooks is now moving to left tackle. So what is your perspective on Jason Peters now starting at left tackle for week one?
That's where he felt the most comfortable. That's where he thrived in his career with both Buffalo and Philadelphia. So I'm actually glad he's doing that. It helps him out, especially in this matchup. As we know, Washington will bring a ton of pass rush coming into this ball game. So it at least protects them, or protects Carson Wentz on the edges. And you don't have to worry about a question whether or not they're going to get pressure coming from that left side. So giving them some stability, some comfort on the tackles spots. And, you have Jason Kelsey right there in the middle. Now you just worry about the guards being up to par and handling their business up front against Washington.
Speaking of Washington, they got a monstrous defensive front. I mean, Jonathan Allen. You still have Kerrigan coming off the end. You draft a freak like Chase Young. How dangerous is this Washington defense?
It's very dangerous. And I think when you look at their front four, They can rush the passer. There's guys that can play multiple spots on the interior as well. They can get pressure from within as well as on the outside. And I think they've improved in the secondary, adding Ronald Darby, getting a second year of Jimmy Moreland, the people's cornerback, as they call him. Kendall Fuller is out there as well. And it looks like Troy Apke has stepped up and sees that role at free safety. So he is improved, and they still have Landon Collins, who's a solid player also. So I do like the front end and also the back end. As with Philly, you wonder about that linebacking core. I think that's going to be the biggest key. I think the biggest key to that game is whoever is going to be able to win up front, because you have a good offensive line in spots with Philly, a good offensive line in spots with Washington. Both teams have very good defensive lines, and it'll be up to who, the point of attack to decide who wins that game.
Speaking of that defense also, Jack Del Rio, first year as a defensive coordinator, everywhere he's gone, those defenses get better in that first year. And it's incredible because this guy has coached what seems like everywhere. I mean, Carolina, the Jacksonville, the Denver, the Oakland. What is he bringing to this Washington football team that wasn't there previously?
A straight direction of how scheme is supposed to be done and scheming around good players, and he has a bevy of them. You talk about Chase Young, the first-round pick. You have Ryan Kerrigan, Montez Sweat, Jonathan Allen, Donald Payne, Matt Ioannidis, Tim Settle. So you have a bunch of talent up there, up front that they can get versatile. And you have some guys on the back end, at the second and third levels that are very solid players. Cole Holcomb is coming off of a solid rookie season. He brought in Thomas Davis, who's like an extra coach out there on the field. And we talk about their secondary, bringing in Ronald Darby and Landon Collins. He's probably going to be one of those move pieces to put him in position to make plays on the ball and plays in a run game. So when you have that amount of talent with a coach like Jack Del Rio and what he has proven time and time again with his defenses, it's going to be impressive to see how quickly they get off the bus ready to go in week one.
Let's stay on defense and go back to the Eagles. And I'm curious your perspective on what happened over the weekend, because the Eagles, they didn't just cut one. They cut two draft picks who were cornerbacks, Sidney Jones, Rasul Douglas. Now they're going with Maddox. He's the guy they drafted. But the majority of that secondary are guys who they did not draft. So does that say anything to you that you have two guys in Douglas and Jones who this team drafted and they're saying, you know what? We're going to move on. We're going with guys like free agents and guys who we traded for.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting to see. Although Maddox is one of my favorite players on the Eagles squad because he can play multiple spots in that secondary. They bring in Darius Slay, which should lock down Washington's or anybody's number one wide receiver. Nickel Roby-Coleman is one that had very good success out there in Los Angeles. And, he fits the mantra of a Philadelphia Eagles slot corner. I think Crevon LeBlanc is a very solid player as well. So they have good players. I was shocked that they gave up on Sidney Jones and also Rasul Douglas. Both guys have been through the ringer, have had some success. Yeah, they gave up some plays, but for the most part, they played well. And I thought they improved last year as the season went on. I'm more interested to see Jalen Mills at safety. Rodney McLeod is one of the better free safeties in the game. So it's not like they got worse in the secondary. It's just going to look a little different.
Now, speaking of looking different, we know that Jim Schwartz, he's the coach. He's been there for a while. But the interesting thing with the secondary that stands out to me, Emory, is they got a new defensive backs coach. Marquand Manuel is a guy who doesn't come from the type of schemes that Jim Schwartz does. And considering the changes we're seeing in the Eagles secondary, how much influence do you think Manuel's style and his background is maybe being brought into this conversation?
Well, you will hope it would be a lot, but again, he's not the DC, so he only has so much influence out there. But as far as coaching up those guys on the back end, it's just always good to get a new voice in there and maybe teach you some things that you hadn't, thought about, or show you something different that you hadn't seen because you were so used to one particular voice for however long you've been there. So it's always good to get a fresh voice in there, a new perspective, and we'll see how it works out for him.
Now, on the offensive side for the Eagles, we talked about Jason Peters, but I want to get your perspective. You're always great looking at these running backs, and this Eagles depth chart, it's got some fan favorites, but it doesn't have a lot of, tons of experience. outside of Corey Clement, who had that Super Bowl run, he hasn't played a ton since that season. Boston Scott was an electric, but a short amount of period last year. Miles Sanders coming into his second year. So, in your eyes, from what you've seen, what is your perspective on the Eagles running backs?
They do a good job of identifying traits and what they like. And so they stockpile the position with a bunch of those type of guys that can catch the ball out of the backfield, can in some cases be downfield threats in the passing game, i.e. the guy they just picked up, Jason Huntley, the rookie from New Mexico State, is one that if he wanted to be a slot receiver, he could be a slot receiver. That's how good of a route runner he is and how good he is at catching the football. He's also explosive. So he's kind of like Miles Sanders in that regard as far as the passing game. And Miles Sanders is the one that's going to be the lead dog out the gate. And you hope that, Doug Peterson doesn't get enamored with trying to, give everybody a touch. And just for the sake of being multiple, sometimes you got to ride that lead dog and allow him to get to that running back's groove. We call it, to where he's reading everything beforehand. He's able to, anticipate well. He's doing what he has to do at the second and third levels to rip off long runs, because that's the guy that they should have fed last year, earlier in the season, but now he has a chance, since he's the starter, to really hit the ground running.
Emory Hunt joining us here on the Boardwalk on the Hotline on 97.3 ESPN. Make sure to follow him on Twitter at FBall Game Plan for all your NFL and college football analysis, also fantasy football coverage for The Athletic. And Emory, one more thing on the Eagles offense. You mentioned Doug Peterson, and I go back to something we talked about earlier in the summer, which was, there was an article that came out by Mike Clay of ESPN. He talked about how Doug Peterson is among the coaches with the most plays per game in the NFL over the last 4 years. What is your perspective on a coach who's able to get that many plays per game? It almost some ways seems like he's maxing out the potential of his offense each week.
Or you just running plays for the sake of running plays. And you see this issue in college football where, you're going fast to run a play, and 9 times out of 10, either you have a false start, or someone misses an assignment, or a quick incompletion, and now it's 2nd and 10 because you wanted to go fast and get a playoff. Sometimes the best play is the right play, and that all comes from getting the right play in, making sure everyone has the assignment, and getting out there. And, because if you're running all these plays, it better translate to points. With the way they run plays, you would think the Eagles would average 35, 40 points a game. But, see, that's not the case. You look at a team like Kansas City, who's getting the right play every time, for lack of a better term. That's how you become an efficient offense. Yeah, getting plays is cool. It sounds nice. But what are you doing with those plays is the biggest key.
So in your eyes, then, how can the Eagles be more efficient on the football field?
I think they have the right idea, because you got a good quarterback in Carson Wentz that gets the ball out of his hands pretty quickly. He doesn't hold the football long like he did as a rookie. He doesn't have a problem dumping the ball off to the tight end, which is good, because you got 2 good tight ends in Goddard and Ertz, and you have these catch and run guys now. When Rager gets healthy, Jackson is a guy that you really want to take a shot with, but you look at those backs who we talked about, Sanders and Huntley or Scott, guys that can catch and run. Alshon seems to be another 3rd tight end, essentially, a guy that's good in the short to intermediate area of the field. And you see what you got with your other guys like Arcega-Whiteside, or one of these rookies that made the squad as well. So I think they have the opportunity, but if you want to spread the field and go, and push the pace like they do with all those plays, you have to have the protection up front, and that's why it'll be interesting to see how they do against Washington.
Let's look at the other 2 teams in the NFC East. Let's first start with the team up the Turnpike, the Joe Judge era in New York. I know it's a team that you keep your eyes on very closely. So what have you seen from the Giants with the start of the Joe Judge era as we start to go into week 1?
I think Lorenzo Carter is primed for a breakout season. Watching that scrimmage, he shows some twitchiness coming off the edge, something that you hadn't seen before. Now, granted, he was going up against the rookie Andrew Thomas, who he's seen all throughout training camp at practice, but it was just impressive to see how quick and twitched up he was coming off the edge. I think their defensive front 7 will be much better than given credit for. I think they're a little bit more athletic this year. They're lengthy. Dexter Lawrence in the second year is going to be a very good player. Secondary is going to be interesting to watch because they, like the Eagles, added a bunch of new players. You got Logan Ryan just signed on, Isaiah Yadam just signed on, James Bradbury comes on from the Carolina Panthers, and they have the rookie Darnay Holmes, who's expected to be one of the slot corners, and you expect the growth from two rookies last year, and Julian Love and Corey Ballantyne. So you want to see how the secondary will gel together under defensive coordinator Patrick Graham.
I think a lot of people always want to know about the quarterback. So what is your eyes telling you about Daniel Jones entering year 2?
You got to wait and see, because even in the scrimmage, he took out of the 5 sacks, he got, I would say 3 of them were on him, where he, was completely unaware in the pocket, held the ball a little bit too long, and put the ball on the turf twice. So until it's a real game, you won't know what improvements he's made as a pro, because you can't really see much in practice due to the fact that, you can't hit the quarterback. So quarterbacks know that, so they know they're not getting real pressure, and therefore they have the confidence to make all kinds of throws in practice. But we see that change once the live bullets come and you can actually get hit. So you won't know much about Daniel Jones until, week 1 against Pittsburgh.
Let's head over to Dallas then. We'll check back on Daniel Jones later in the season when we talk more, Emory. And the thing with Dallas is they're saying all the right things. Everyone's motivated, they're all focused, all that kind of stuff. But I got to tell you, and, help me out here, I feel like no one is talking enough about the fact that they lost in a high-level center in Travis Frederick. He's retired. They're bringing in some younger players, and I honestly have some concerns about that Dallas offensive line. Am I overrating the issue? Am I underrating it? Am I really focusing on something here?
I think it's a little bit of everything. Yeah, it's a concern because you lose a guy of the caliber of Frederick. But in the same breath, you look at what they have around him and what they brought in. Tyler Beatis, if he's healthy, like he was in 2018, or 2018, and my goodness, man, they replaced Frederick with a future Frederick in Beatis, who was outstanding at Wisconsin. And he dealt with some injury last year. He played through it and still had solid tape, but it wasn't like the 2018 tape when he was fully healthy. So they have an answer, but they're going to start probably with Joe Looney in the middle. They still have Zach Martin. They still have Tyron Smith. And, Cameron Irvin is one that can play across the offensive line. So he should give them some veteran leadership in that position on the right side. But I think Dallas, to be honest, has the most complete team on both sides of the ball. This is a very dangerous football team, and we'll see if – I know Cowboy fans love this – if this could be the year where they go all the way.
How much of that also is the changes in the coaching staff? Because I know a lot of people always pointed to Jason Garrett, that coaching staff, as maybe something that was holding that team back.
Well, it's just like what we talked about with the new secondary coach in Philly. Sometimes you just need a new voice. Garrett has been there for a long time. I want to say, over a decade he was with the Cowboys. And, sometimes things get stale. And a new coach comes in with new ideas, and they still have a similar voice there in Kellen Moore as the OC. And I think when you have the amount of talent that Dallas has on offense and on defense, it's really hard to screw that up, to be honest.
Emory, one more for you, and I always appreciate your time and your analysis. In the NFC East, which team has the best defensive line coming into the year?
Wow, that's a great question. Just on paper, I would have to say Washington, because you look at those edge rushers. You look at those defensive tackles. Now, granted, all health permitting, you want those guys to be out there, and that's the biggest thing. I think they're athletic, they're deep, they're versatile. So I would say Washington has the best defensive line, with Philly probably being number 2. I know people will look at Dallas and Haiti added Everson Griffin and Aldon Smith, but we hadn't seen Aldon Smith since Obama was president, so we don't know what Aldon Smith we're going to get. And Everson Griffin, yeah, he's very good, and you hope Tristan Hill can make that next step. But I would just say it would be Washington, and then Philly, then Dallas, and then the Giants.
He's Emory Hunt. Check out all of his great analysis at F-Ball Game Plan on Twitter. Covers the NFL and college football. And check out all of his fantasy football analysis as well on The Athletic. Emory, always appreciate the time and the analysis. Great stuff, my friend.
Anytime. Appreciate you, man.